I will now request, thank you, Professor Arvind Kumar. Now I will request Professor Varadesh Hiregange to kindly address us. The topic that he will be speaking on would be the roots and shoots of Gandhian philosophy.
Thank you, Dr. Vishal. Three quick responses to the keynote address before I really proceed. And one immediate response to the inconsistency that is generally found in Gandhi, that is sometimes found in Gandhi. A student was also asking a question. I just read out a passage which is there in the beginning of Hind Swaraj, written by M.K. Gandhi. As a response, I would like to say to the diligent reader of my writings and to others who are interested in them that I am not at all concerned with appearing to be consistent. In my search after truth, I have discarded many ideas and learned many new things. Old as I am in age, I have no feeling that I have ceased to grow inwardly, or that my growth will stop at the dissolution of my flesh. What I am concerned with is my readiness to obey the call of truth, that is my God, from moment to moment, and therefore when anybody finds any inconsistency between any two writings of mine, if he has still faith in my sanity, he would do well to choose the later of the two on the same subject. This is Gandhi. And of course, yes, Tagore also disagreed with Gandhi on many counts, but it was also the same Tagore called Gandhi a Mahatma. Just to point out the kind of debate, the nature of debate that was prevalent during those days with such mutual respect. Especially when we have people calling Gandhi as British agent or corporate NGO, etc. So in my paper, of course, it's a very tentative, hypothetical rather paper on roots and shoots of Gandhian philosophy. I will try to broadly delineate what could be the influences and what could be the manifestations of certain philosophical notions he talked about. Strictly speaking, those who are professional philosophers so many of them, they have not considered as they have not considered Gandhi as some kind of a system builder or an academic philosopher. But there are different opinions. In a book titled Evolution of Indian Philosophy, authored by K. Sachidanand Murthy, it is mentioned that Gandhian philosophy is not a philosophy in the strict sense of the term. Because for them, philosophy is a systematic, rational inquiry. Another book authored by Himamshu Roy is titled as Poverty of Gandhian Philosophy. But at least it acknowledges that there is something philosophical about Gandhian thought. Interestingly, another professional academic professor of philosophy from Columbia University, Akil Bilgrami, he titles his article as Gandhi the Philosopher. Gandhi, the philosopher. In the book Living Gandhi. But it is quite interesting when the same article finds its place in another book edited by somebody else. The title becomes different. The title becomes Gandhi's Integrity, the philosophy behind politics. But both the titles have retained the word philosophy in them. I'm just trying to point out the problem associated with the word of philosophy, and Bilgrami also says there is a lack of plain argument in Gandhi, which also causes irritation at times to him. On the other hand, two other authors, Rudolph and Rudolph, they have tried to locate Gandhi in the postmodern discourse. They call him a practitioner, an activist, and also a theorist. Interestingly, Gandhi himself did not have much illusions about being a philosopher. No. To quote him, I have nothing new to teach the world. Truth and non-violence are as old as hills. Well, all my philosophy, it may be called, if at all, it may be called by that pretentious name. You see the word pretentious is contained in what I have said. Those who believe in simple truths I have laid down can propagate them only by living them. So here lies the difference. For him, philosophy was in that sense a love of wisdom. If we go back to the original meaning, etymological meaning of philosophy, the love of wisdom, and not so much a rational inquiry. So I'm primarily using philosophy in its broad sense of the word. What exactly were certain influences on Gandhi with regard to his thought? He exhibits both Eastern and Western influences in his thesis and antithesis, but there is also something original about his final synthesis. So this is my fundamental and basic proposition. So we can find both Eastern and Western influences on his thoughts, but you can also see something very original and also radical at the end of the day. It is also not scriptural, interestingly. He doesn't go by scriptures. Of course, he does cite scripture here and there, but you need to see what he does with Bhagavad Gita. At the end of the paper, I will show you. So he doesn't go by the scriptures. He goes by his experience. So experience matters to him, and yes, consistency is a problem. And it is also said consistency is a virtue. Yes, but consistency is also virtue of an ass. So he has changed over time. So he has said he has moved from truth to truth. So someone who initially called God is truth and finally said truth is God. So that was the trajectory of transformation which he passed through. So he doesn't go by scriptures, but he goes by his experience. He himself admits in many places he is debt to certain Western sources, notably Gospels, especially the Sermon on the Mount, Tolstoy, Thoreau, Ruskin. He was also perhaps influenced by those aspects of Hindu culture which were preserved and emphasized in Gujarat of the 1870s and 80s. It would be worthwhile to listen to his own words on this aspect, on Eastern and Western influence on him. He says, I do not believe that my philosophy is an indifferent mixture of Tolstoy and Buddha. These are Gandhi's words. I do not know what it is except that it is what I feel to be true. It sustains me. I owe much to Tolstoy and much to Buddha. I still somehow or other owe much to Buddha. Sorry, I still somehow or other fancy. Yeah, this is his own sentence. I still somehow or other owe much to Buddha. I still somehow or other fancy that my philosophy represents the true meaning of the teaching of the Gita. But you need to see what he does with Gita at the end of the day. I may be totally mistaken. Such a mistake can do no harm either to me or anybody. For the source of my inspiration is of no consequence if what I stand for is unadulterated truth. Let philosophy I represent be tested on its own merits. This is Gandhi. Let us just take a look at his childhood, because childhood influenced him to shape his thought. He was brought up in 19th century and 19th century Gujarat, and he was born in a Vaishnava family, Vaishnava Vaishya family, and his mother extent only at the end of his life. Last years he starts reading Bhagavad Gita. And Vaishnava tradition was also part of the Bhakti tradition. And Bhakti tradition historically was also a rebellion against the caste system. So many saint poets, bhakti poets, they did not accept the need for the mediator, the priest between us and the cosmic reality. So they just discarded the mediator. They tried to connect with cosmic reality directly. And historically, Bhakti movement in India has a very strong protest root. So he was brought up in Vaishnava tradition. So many of his moral ideas were shaped during that time. As you know, of course, he was quite moved by two plays which all of us have heard. One on Satya Harishchandra and another on Shravana Kumar. But at the same time, he was also a little rebellious. So he just did not accept convention as it is. He was also trying to experiment. So against family convention, he also becomes a meat eater against family convention. So he also smokes cigarette. He was also very upset with the authoritarian patriarchal nature of his father. He was too attached to his wife. And at one point of time, if my memory is correct, he also decides to commit suicide during his childhood. Along with his friend, he makes an attempt, but of course he later decides But against family convention, against the caste convention, he goes abroad for higher studies. And at that point of time, he was in fact banished from his caste council. The Khap Panchayat, we can call it as. So he was banished from his caste council because he traveled abroad, he crossed the sea. It was against the convention. So he just did not bother much about that. He just went to England. So you can also see this nature of rebellion, sort of a rebellious nature in his childhood. And in England, initial years, initial days rather, so he was all Western. He rather tried to imitate the West, the Western clothes, the Western music, the Western dance. So everything Western he does enjoy. But of course, he also will have a girlfriend during that time. Even of course, he goes to England after his marriage. His wife was here only, but he did have a girlfriend there. But finally, he realizes that it is going too far, and suddenly marriage cannot happen. So at that time, he dissociates himself. But it is in England he returns to rather serious philosophical thought in one sense. Interestingly, he returns to vegetarianism there, and his first experiment, or rather, first experiment was with vegetarianism. So it was a conscious choice. He comes back, he returns to it. And there, of course, he was also introduced to the theosophical movement. So, theosophical movement, and it was part of this theosophical movement he develops many of his ideas. And not in India, but in England, he reads the English translation of Bhagavad Gita. So he doesn't read Bhagavad Gita in Gujarati, not in India, but he reads Bhagavad Gita in England in its translation. He comes in contact with Madam Blavatsky, Arnold, etc. And he was also introduced to Bible. So he finds the Old Testament quite dull. But he finds New Testament and especially Sermon on the Mount quite interesting. And in fact, later in his years, he also makes in his autobiography, he makes the connection between a Gujarati poet called Shamal Bhatt and Sermon on the Mount. They are quite similar. In fact, what Shamal Bhatt has written and what Sermon on the Mount says, return good for evil in essence. Both Shamal Bhatt and Sermon on the Mount talk about that, returning good with evil. Sorry, returning good for evil. So he was quite open to ideas, open to influences, but he developed something of his own, something that is original. And it is also a famous Gandhian dictum that you need to keep your windows open, let fresh air and light come from every side, let the windows be open, but see that your foundation is not blown off. So foundation is not blown off, but let fresh air and light come from every side. So in 1909, he writes his Hind Swaraj. And you need to see, I thought I'll just read it out, because at the end of Hind Swaraj, he also gives a list of books. Gandhi also recommends a few books. And the very recommendation of those books, you can also see the kind of influence he had. What are these books? You can also make both a qualitative and quantitative analysis of this. In the sense, there are about 15 to 16 books. The kingdom of God is within you. This is by Tolstoy. What is art? Tolstoy. The slavery of our times. Tolstoy. The first step. Tolstoy. How shall we escape? Tolstoy. Letter to a Hindu. Tolstoy. So there are 6 books of Tolstoy he recommends at the end of Hind Swaraj. You can see what shaped his thought. And incidentally, Tolstoy finally says that M.K. Gandhi is his spiritual successor. So there was also a correspondence between Gandhi and Tolstoy, and he mentions that Gandhi is his spiritual successor. The white slaves of England, Sherard. So let me also mention at this point, he was against the empire, he was against colonialism, yes. But certainly he was not against British per se. He had many friends in the other West. He had many British friends. So he was not against anyone as human beings. So for him, in fact, in that sense, world is one. Everyone should be part of that. But yes, he was against British being the colonial masters in India. So he even goes to the extent of saying, if you don't continue as colonial masters, if you prefer to be just citizens like any one of us, you need not leave the country. You be here, you stay here. I have no problem. He goes to the extent of saying that. So he did not have anything personal against British in that sense. He did not hate them. civilization, its cause and cure. Carpenter. Here you also see the genesis of his what may be described as critique of modern civilization, which is the essence of his book in Swaraj, in one way, in one sense. The fallacy of speed, Taylor. A new crusade, Blount. On the duty of civil obedience. This is by Thoreau. Professor Arvind Kumar mentioned his name, Thoreau. So Thoreau's civil disobedience perhaps may be connected with Satyagraha of Gandhi in later years. But Satyagraha, his own unique evolution, finally, in its final form. And life without principles, Thoreau. And finally, there are quite a few. I'll just briefly read out. Unto this last, Ruskin. And again, unto this last, you can also connect it this with Gandhi's Sarvodaya, which is a very important concept. Of course, I have not dealt with Sarvodaya in detail, but something that is also very dear to my heart. So you may connect it with unto this last of Ruskin. He translates this book into Gujarati. A joy forever, Ruskin. So the quantitative analysis you can see. So majority of the books are authored by Tolstoy, then by Ruskin, then by Thoreau. So these are the names. Duties of man, Imagine, Defense and Death of Socrates from Plato. So Socrates for him was important because he also includes Socrates with Jesus, Muhammad, Guru Nanak, Buddha, Mahavir, etc., who stood for truth. Who stood for truth. Who were ready for self-sacrifice for truth. Because Socrates, he was given the option. He was given the option in fact to apologize so that he would have saved his life. because the allegation against him was primarily he was vitiating the minds of the youth, corrupting the minds of the youth by making them ask questions, etc., etc. But Socrates says, no, I will drink hemlock and leave. This is the time I leave, I leave. So he stands by what he believed in. So, defense and death of Socrates from Plato. Of course, then paradoxes of civilization by Max Nordau.